Shut up and sit down.
The farming town of Hobart is the most southern of all Australia's capitals. It's a town that still maintains many of its deep-rooted connections with its long agrarian past and still has most of its predominantly rural communities. It's a very spread out city reaching nearly 25 kilometres up both sides of the River Derwent. It's still a very hilly city that's shadowed by a 1,250 metre Mount Wellington. It's also one of Australia's oldest cities that was settled some 25 years after Sydney was on the mainland. It's a very quiet place without all the traffic and aeroplane noise of other cities. The city itself has almost everything you'd expect from a capital city / regional rural centre, and is steeped in history and is very proud of its long past. Anglicanism is the predominant religion, and this place still does share many of its qualities with its Anglo-Saxon settlers. Personally, I would look at the climate and landscape of this city and note that it shares more with Europe than it does the rest of Australia. It's a place where many of the locals will look a stranger in the face and nod good day, then walk on past without making any further conversation. Here they are happy to chat to familiar faces and take pride in not disturbing their neighbours. After my attempts to get to Cape York and Step Point, I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to visit the southernmost point of all Australian states at South Cape Bay. The point itself is a fairly decent ride until you get to the end of the bitumen at Ida Bay, followed by a 20-kilometre gravel road to Cockle Creek, which is again followed by an 8-kilometre walk to the south coast track to the bay itself. The most southern point is at the end of a peninsula that has no land access, and only the beach in the bay is accessible without a boat, leaving me with only able to look from 2.5 kilometres away to the actual point. I thought the southernmost point would also give me the opportunity to see the southern aurora with my own eyes. I didn't know if all the requirements for the aurora would exist, but I didn't want to just squander the chance. Waiting weeks for a cloud-free night in Hobart was becoming a hurdle that told me that things weren't just going to line up. But I waited until the last possible opportunity just in case, which was also going to be the summer Solaris, making it the shortest night of the year. I knew with the country roads missing many of their road markers, and with no line or reflectors on the gravel roads, it was going to be fairly dangerous for me to make my way back after midnight if things didn't work out. I imagined it was going to be safer just waiting a few hours until daybreak. Getting to the bay about an hour before sunset, I was able to witness one of the most stunning views until about 9 p.m. and then the twilight would continue for another hour and a half. The horizon appeared cloudy, and I knew I wasn't going to get lucky with the aurora, but I had little choice but to stick it out until daybreak. The temperature dropped substantially once the sun had finally disappeared, and the effort to lug all my wet weather riding gear along me with the 8-kilometre track had paid off. I set the camera to what I guessed was the South Pole according to the point of the Southern Cross, and waited to see if by some divine intervention I was going to get lucky. Being the shortest night of the year, it did allow me to watch the hue from the sun travel from the sunset in the west to the sunrise in the east, but there was no noticeable aurora. On first daylight, several surfers started to appear as the bay looked to host some decent waves, and those willing to make an effort to get out there can pretty much have the whole place to themselves. Without a surf cam to give them a heads up towards conditions, it's an effort to just get out there, and they just have to make do with whatever surf's available. The walk back in the morning was daunting. Also, without any sleep and little food, I quickly ran out of water. In hindsight, I should have left some more food and water with a bike for my return, as battling fatigue and hunger coming back along the gravel road left me in a very vulnerable state, and I was lucky that I've gotten back to the bitumen unscathed. Port Arthur is a fairly well-preserved, large-scale colonial penal complex, which in itself is not that unusual throughout the country, and I remembered with the Linton Convict Depot just north of Geraldton in Western Australia, which is a similar but smaller complex that I was able to visit for free. Port Arthur was created by the English Empire for two main purposes. First, it was to force people to settle in Tasmania, preventing the French from laying claim to the island, and secondly was to establish commerce in the area to further encourage settlement. And for this, they selected a location for the complex that was right in the middle of an area that grew naturally tall straight timber suitable for boat building. The location for the complex was designed to take advantage of the huge distances and the cold weather to make sure that the prisoners didn't abscond. The main prison dormitory was designed to be a difficult place, which, when you look at the guardhouses and the free settlers' homes, the living conditions for all were difficult. The primary economic drivers in the settlement were building ships for the Southern Ocean fishing fleet and growing grass for sheep and cattle. The buildings themselves are well maintained considering their age. Several sections look to have been rebuilt with a nearly $50 entrance fee. There's a small well-hidden memorial to those who lost their lives in the 1996 shooting that claimed the lives of some 35 people. And after visiting the ruins in WA, I'm somewhat disappointed not to be able to read centuries-old graffiti inscribed on the walls. It also struck me as curious that in WA I had to pay to wander around some trees in the Valley of the Giants, but in Cross Harbour I could wander around some equally spectacular river red gums for free. Then in Tassie I had to pay to wander around some old buildings, which I was able to do in WA for free. Now I have to find out what I can do in Tassie for free that I have to pay for in New South Wales. Leaving Devonport on a bright sunny morning, all was looking good for an enjoyable day in the saddle. With the expected path along National Route 1 that stretched its way from Devonport to Hobart via Launceston was just too straight and boring and didn't match the purposes of this journey, so I decided to take the road in the opposite direction. Heading out of Devonport to have a look at the town of Forth, which did leave me with having to dodge your usual Tassie hazards like irrigation and tractors. Moving on to Gunns Plains, Google Maps doesn't give you the option to preference the tourist drives, and I was having to force maps to direct me down the roads it didn't really want to go. The country roads are very tight and have little to no shoulders, road markings or signs. Learning to ride in New South Wales, where almost all corners rated lower than the speed limits are signs, and that taught me to rely on them when setting up the bike for each corner. So for example, if the sign says that the rating is beneath 30 kilometres, I then know to use first gear. Here in Tasmania, only the extremely slow blind corners seem to have rating signs, and if it wasn't for Google Maps allowing me to see just how sharp the corners were ahead, I'm sure I would have come off the road a number of times. If you're a local and know these roads like the back of your hand, you can drive at the 100km speed limit. But if you're touring Tasmania and never driven these roads before, it is somewhat suicidal to try and stick to the speed limits. Riding out of the valley, the skies were blue and I was having a really enjoyable day. The country roads are small and have oncoming trucks, and it is something that you really need to prepare for. The normal rule of thumb is to stay on the outside of corners and not to cross the debris field left in between the tyre ruts, as this doesn't leave much room for error and you'll be off the road without any second chance preventing itself. Joining the A10 for the first time of the day towards Guildford, saw the return of the fully marked bitumen and a more comfortable ride. Heading up to Cradle Mountain and a lookout at Black Buff, I was now in the Tasmanian high country. There are higher mountain peaks in the state, but it is far too cold up here for the trees, and I was happy to be heading back down, as the sunny start to the day meant I had packed up my wet weather pants underneath all my luggage. I stopped for a sticky beak at one of the many Tasmanian dams before pulling into Deloraine for lunch. I'd spent over 3 hours getting some 50 kilometres away from where I started the day's ride. Just south of Deloraine are the Great Lakes, where I hit another 20km stretch of dirt road on the Marlborough Highway. At first it wasn't that bad, but a lot of the loose gravel on the road meant I had to keep pulling over to let those four-wheel drives pass. Then came the rain, and the day was starting to become very difficult. Finally the road opened up a bit and I was able to have enough space to pull out the drain without risking it hitting a tree. I made it back to the A10 for the second time of the day. So far the day was moving along pretty much as planned, with some only minor tribulations. There were some cold and wet sections that I hadn't totally expected, but all was still on track for me making Hobart by the expected time. I just passed through the Darula Hydro Park and was heading back up the gorge when the bike started to feel like a drunken sailor in the corners. At first I wasn't sure if the tyres were just caught in a crack or an indentation on the road, but it happened a second time, so I decided to pull over and double check that everything was okay. Then I discovered that I had a flat tyre, the first of this journey. Last time I had a puncture, the tyre was relatively new and had a fair bit of tread on it, which slowed the deflation down to hours. This time the tyre was worn, and with a smaller hole than the previous puncture, it went totally flat in minutes. The plan of just pulling over every so often and adding air to the tyre wasn't going to work, and I had about 130 kilometres left in the day's ride, which meant I would have had to stop every kilometre or so. Luckily I was in mobile phone range, and it was still only just past 4 on a weekday afternoon. I tried searching Google for a motorcycle recovery guy in Hobart, but only car towing results turned up. I then called the Honda dealership in Hobart, who put me onto a guy called the Bike Ambulance, and whose number I was able to find on Facebook. Hooray for technology. With a 2-hour wait on the side of the road, I was able to drop off the bike before making my accommodation, being only 3 hours late. I'm still not sure if I had tyre plugs it would have saved me the $350, as the hole was right in the middle of the most worn section of the tyre. But then maybe I could have had the experience plugging the tyre, although it would have made me wait until after 5 PM before calling the bike shop, and everyone may have gone home. Life is complicated and there is no right answer. I'm just thankful that it didn't happen to me up north, where I didn't have mobile reception and I needed someone to drive some thousands of kilometres to come get me. Staying with a placard-carrying member of the United Australian Party has its interesting points, as my hosts are your typical hard-working, warm-hearted country folk that don't own an ironing board. The house is on the street that was voted the most attractive in 1985, and the neighbours are all still trying to reclaim those glory days. It's been the Hobart experience that I was hoping to achieve on this journey. The tyres didn't last me the extra few thousand kilometres that I was hoping to get out of them, and the additional risk of running them so low did cost me, but being in the East Coast bubble and closer to resources, I was able to take that risk without it costing too much. When the same thing happened to me crossing the top end, I had paid some $400 for a tyre that I was only going to throw away in another 3,000 kilometres, which was $50 more than the tow. The puncture didn't look like it was caused by something pushing through, but may have been created by me pumping up the tyre pressure a week earlier, and hence the softer tyre would have resisted bursting, and running lower tyre pressures with worn tyres is a good idea. Also, I'm not 100% confident the plugs would have saved the day, but in hindsight I really should have purchased a kit and learned how to use them. Vodafone and NBN are all working well. With all the bad weather and all the no drone zones around Tassie, the drone hasn't gotten that much use either. It's been cold, colder than winter is in Sydney, and I really should have packed up my long pyjamas and Ugg boots. The temperature has been nearly 10 degrees colder than the long-term averages for this time of the year, and it's difficult to predict such abnormal weather conditions. I've been putting things off waiting for a sunny day to do stuff, and I've almost burnt through my entire first week. Waiting for the weather to improve has caused all my plans to be delayed, and I'm starting to really fall behind, as there are so many other things I wanted to do, but even with 2 weeks I've just run out of time. The birds are different here, and there are very few lizards. The pied currawongs have less white feathers and have different calls. All your favourite birds are here, such as seagulls, cockatoos and magpies, plus a whole heap of smaller little finches. I'm finding that Tasmanians are an agricultural society who treat most of the problems with the same sort of response as bad weather, by just ignoring it and focusing on what's in their control. For some people this passive response is totally respectable, but I find that the local authorities seem to delight in putting obstacles in people's paths, under the belief that it will heighten the sense of achievement when they overcome such difficulties. Next stop is Launceston, where I have the opportunity to travel along and explore the east coast of Tassie. I've been told that the east coast is similar to the east coast of the mainland, in that there are a larger population and more resources on the road. Fingers crossed for another great ride. So thanks for my adventures around Australia. Remember to go out there and do something to enjoy your day.